Our WISE team, under the great leadership of Lisa Lazor, has helped to put together a program this year that will help, we hope, all of us, no matter our age, to grow older more gracefully. And of course, one of the first aspects of that is to know what to expect with the aging process physically. So we're delighted to have Dr. Stephen Arthur Wyrick with us today. As many of you know, I have known Steve for centuries, and I will tell you that he's probably one of the finest docs around. He is a graduate of the University of Rochester Medical School, his internship at Case Western Reserve University. He has been a family doc. He has worked for NASA. He was the medical director for one of the largest street clinics in the United States at the Cleveland Clinic, at the Cleveland Free Clinic. And he is really just a remarkable, personable guy. And he's going to share a little bit, and then we're going to leave some time for some questions as well, because I suspect you may have some questions. So, Steve, thank you so much for being with us. Thank you.
Glad to see you all. And so just like Laura said, I wanted to just share some thoughts with you, and then open it up for some questions later. And if there's even time, I think on a lot of our minds, we can even talk a little bit about coronavirus if you'd like to. So I'm going to, I think that a lot of us, especially looking around the room, we know what to expect as we get older. We're experiencing it ourselves now as we speak. So what I want to kind of focus on is what we can do about it to prevent, or to, prevention. It's been announced that prevention is better than a wonder cure. And what we can do to kind of hold off the inevitable as long as possible. And so because we're a church, I thought, I looked at the Bible. And I looked up in the Bible, what does the Bible say about growing old with grace and wisdom? And to my surprise, according to Google, there are 40 Bible verses directly related to this topic. And my favorite was in 2 Corinthians, and it was chapter 4, verse 16. And the verse goes, "Therefore we do not lose heart. Though outwardly we are wasting away, yet inwardly we are being renewed day by day." And I thought that was kind of a nice way to put it. So what is an average life expectancy? What are we expected? How old do we expect, that God created us to be? And that comes from the Bible too. In the Bible, in Genesis, chapter 6, verse 3, it was kind of funny when I read it. It was like, "Then the Lord said, my spirit will not contend with humans forever, for they are mortal. Their days will be 120 years." So there it is. It says 120.
Is it before or after the apple?
No, that would be after. That was later in Genesis. And I've heard this. I was trying to find his name last night. But on several different occasions, I've heard this really wonderful Swiss cardiologist speak at national meetings. And his theory is that our life expectancy should be 106 years. And he bases that on the fact that human DNA starts to disintegrate, degrade at about 106 years, and leaving it up for problems. So that's his theory. And he contends that anyone who dies before 106 years of age is dying prematurely, which is kind of a nice way to put it. So there's this whole theory about DNA degradation, and it's in that in every single cell in our body, in the DNA in each one of those cells, of the billions and maybe even trillions of cells that we each have in our body, every minute, each cell, there's between 25 to 115 times per minute that the DNA is damaged and that it replaces. So if you add it all up, that in a day, each cell has between 36,000 to 160,000 episodes of DNA damage. and then multiply that by, by all, the billions and trillions of cells that we have, you can see there's a lot of opportunity for damage to go to to the DNA. And our bodies, when we're younger, our immune systems can identify that damage. But even when you're having 160,000 episodes per cell per day, all the different cells, you can see that there's an opportunity, like, hey, if your immune system screws up a little bit, and you even have one damaged DNA that survives and replicates, that's how things can go bad pretty quickly. So then I think you have an understanding. My mother always used to say that, our bodies are a temple to God. I'm sure other people's mothers said that. Listen, respect your body, because that's the building, the vessel where we dwell, our souls dwell in. And so you can think of our bodies as a building or a dwelling. And especially, like, it works really well if you think of the heart. The heart's got 4 rooms, 4 chambers. There's doors between the rooms, which are the valves. There's plumbing to the outside of the heart, which is the blood supply. And then you have electrical wiring buried deep in that heart. And so Ron and I having just sold an older house, if you have an old house, no matter how well you take care of that house, no matter how well you take care of it, some pipe is going to rust out or clog up, or some electrical short is going to happen. And boom, there you have, a heart attack, right? And so what we're trying to do is prevent, but if you live in a newer house, we want you to do that preventive maintenance and not flush entire rolls of toilet paper down your toilet to clog up things prematurely, right? That's what, so, yeah, like toilet paper. Yeah, we had to go to Naples yesterday to buy toilet paper. So now I think you have an appreciation why heart disease is the number, or cardiovascular death is the number 1 in 3 causes of death in this country, and cancer is the number 2 cause of death, because of the DNA damage. So if we're looking at just heart disease, there's been some really compelling evidence about heart disease, because if you've ever had the opportunity to actually dissect an atherosclerotic heart, open it up and look at the vessels. Those atherosclerotic plaques, if they've been there for a while, are like cement. They're hard, they're calcified, they're hard. And so the old thinking was, once you start to have a blockage, it's only going to get worse. It can never go away. It's like, it's not going to wear away. And that's not true. That's not necessarily true. And there's been some compelling research that was really started in the 1980s. And the forefront of that was actually a man from Cleveland Clinic. And the cardiologist's name is Caldwell Esselstyn. And he's a very nice man, and he's well into his 90s now. And he came out with a book that was called Prevent and Reverse Heart Disease. And his research showed that if you got people on if you got their cholesterol down ultra low, and it was a combination of diet, exercise, and medication, and statins. You can get there, and the statin that he had back in the 80s was one that was called simvastatin, which is now kind of an old one that we don't use a lot anymore. But although you came to it for $7.50 in Publix, it's on there. They're lesser, they're cheaper, but it doesn't work as well as the atorvastatin or rosuvastatin. But his research showed if you can get someone's cholesterol down ultra low, and that was defined as a total cholesterol less than 150, and maintain the total cholesterol. And they weren't even looking at LDL versus HDL, but getting that total cholesterol down ultra low. And they did it through serial catheterizations, which is a very invasive thing, which we wouldn't do today. That he showed that you can actually reduce the blockages that were in the heart. And that was research that was replicated by many, many other researchers. And one of the ones that was the most known is a guy by the name of Dr. Dean Ornish. You might have heard about him. And he simultaneously published, when Esselstyn published his Prevent and Reverse Heart Disease, Dean Ornish came out with his first book called Reversing Heart Disease, and this was in 1990. And then Dr. Ornish took his research a little bit different in subsequent years. So what they were trying to do is, how they did this research with Dr. Ornish is they would take little white rabbits, with a little pink nose and pink eyes, they were little fuzzy rabbits, and they had them in this huge laboratory, and half of them they gave a high-fat diet, and the other half they gave a low-fat diet. And they fed them for, I think it was 18 months, and then they sacrificed each one of them, and they dissected them and looked at their arteries, and as expected, the rabbits that were fed the high-fat diet had a higher rate of heart disease, of atherosclerosis, of blockages in their arteries than the low-fat. But even within each group, about half of the rabbits in each group had significantly more heart disease than the other half. And they were looking at that and saying, why is that? They're all in the exact same environment, the same room, and they're fed exactly the same thing on the same day at the same time. And why would half in each group have even less heart disease than the other half? And then they looked at it, and they observed that when they did more research, they realized that the rabbits that had less heart disease in both groups were on the shelves, the cages were stacked 4 high. And it was the cages that were down low, the 2 below, that had the less heart disease. And they said, well, why is that? So they watched, and it was the same woman who would go in and feed these rabbits every day, same time. And she was short. And so when she would have to reach, and all she did differently is each rabbit down the lower cages, all she did was touch the little nose twice a day. And so that was full, just touch the little nose. And these rabbits that had that touch, that human touch, and he went so far, and he was a pioneer in medicine. We're kind of scientists. We think we're scientists, But he brought in the whole term of love, and he actually published in 1998 2 more good books, that it was called The Healing Power of Love and Survival. Both of them he published in 1998, based on that research that they were able to then reproduce. And then they actually even showed that with subsequent studies, not only did they just have the person touch the nose, they would take it out and they'd hold the rabbits. And they even had less heart disease than the ones that just had which is, I think, fascinating. And as Christians, I think that's a nice thing to think about. So let's talk about what I'm really supposed to talk about, which is the pathophysiology of aging, right? And, aging is characterized by a gradual decrease in organ functional reserve. And that's the operative word, functional reserve, which reduces, so when you take away the reserve of an organ, that you actually, when that body is stressed, you don't have that reserve. So think of it like cash on hand. It is what you use all the time. And then functional reserve is money in the bank. All right? So what do you have in the bank? And all of our vital organs, all of them, we use about 10% in any given time of our body's capacity, of that function, of that organ's function. So at any time we use about 10% of our cardiac function. We're using, as we're sitting here just breathing quietly, we use about 10% of our lung function. We believe that all of us, adults, use about 10% of our brain function. Liver function, if you go in, and the liver is the only vital organ that we have that actually can regenerate. Heart cells, kidney cells, lung cells, pancreas cells, brain cells, once they're gone, they're gone. Liver cells regenerate. Liver cells can regenerate. You can go in and you can surgically remove 90% of a healthy person's liver, and that 10% will grow back into a full functional liver. But if you go in by accident and cut out 91%, then that person dies. So that 90% is the reserve, is the functional reserve. So when things start to decline, you're tapping into that, you're tapping into the bank account. And a person feels fine. A perfect example would be like kidney function. So if you have, we have 2 kidneys, most of us have 2 kidneys, right? And let's say we measure, the measure of kidney function is what they say, we talk about creatinine. You measure the serum creatinine level. And the serum creatinine level is about 1, give or take. It's about 1. So if you go in and you take a person with 2 kidneys and you measure the creatinine level and it's 1, and you would then, that person would donate a kidney, and they take away 50% of their, of their kidney capacity, what would you expect the creatinine to be right after surgery? 0.5, 2, 1. It's 1. It's still because even though you removed 50% of that person's capacity, if you have a healthy functioning kidney, knowing that you're only using about 10%, you're still going to have a normal creatinine after that. And so when people start to bump their creatinine, they've had significant damage to their functional reserve. So they're bumping it up to you probably lost about 80% at least, if not more. And so that further damage to nephrons and people can go down pretty quickly with like kidney disease. And that's true in all of our major functions. And some of the really interesting things about, let's say, talk about brain. Let's talk about the brain. There was Marion Diamond, she's at the University, or was at the University of California, Berkeley. She was probably the forefront researcher in neuroanatomy. And she's the one that had the opportunity to dissect Albert Einstein's brain. And so they took his brain and they dissected it in 1985. And they showed with Albert Einstein that he had 25% more of a certain kind of brain cells called astrocytes than the rest of us. And so the theory is like Albert Einstein probably didn't use 10% of his brain function. He used probably about 25%, which is why he could come up with all these amazing theories and probably was felt to be the smartest person in the world who have ever lived. Simultaneously, she was doing a lot of studies of looking at German auto workers for the 17 years before him, and was able to find people that had higher brain functioning, less disease of the brain. And she found out that, and she published this information in 1987, saying, the factors for a healthy brain function as we age are good diet, exercise, challenge, being challenged, thinking, being priced, novelty, so like change. Change is not necessarily a bad thing. It's something that we can adapt to. It causes us to adapt. And then the 5th thing is love. And she published this in 1987. So there was a whole bunch of researchers coming out like saying, and it kind of fits in exactly with what you were talking about today in terms of love and social justice, our social interaction, which is really difficult right now with this whole coronavirus thing. So what happens to our bodies? And I think we all know what happens. Our skin thins. We lose elasticity in our skin and our connective tissues. And I'm reminded when I was a young doctor, as Laurie said, for many years I worked for NASA I was the medical director of the NASA Research and Development Facility in Cleveland. Everyone thinks of NASA as they think of Johnson Space Center in Houston, or they think of the Kennedy Space Center here. But there's actually 13 NASA facilities around the country. And they're basically the ones that are not the, mission control and the launch pad. The other 11, yeah, that's right, 11 plus 2 is 13. The other 11 are all these huge research facilities. And each of them has their area of expertise. So that, and for instance, the one in Cleveland was looking at microgravity, the effects of microgravity on human beings, and also in how it affects combustion. So combustion in a zero gravity environment, and then also we looked at jet propulsion in there. And I had this one researcher. So it was basically, it was about at that time, it was about 5,000 employees. So it was literally 5,000 rocket scientists. Literally rocket scientists. And there was one who also was he was a professional bodybuilder. And he was actually he was at least was the state champion and was going on to become Mr. I don't know what they call him, Mr. Bodybuilder, Mr. Universe. And he was this 50-year-old man, rocket science, PhD rocket scientist. And I remember he was training for a meet, it was a meet, I guess they called it. And I had seen him on Friday, and I said to him, his name was Dan, I said, Dan, you know, you're not 20 anymore. Make sure that before you go in there and you deadlift your 400 pounds, if you're bench pressing, that you warm up. He says, Steve, I've been doing this my entire life. I don't have time. You know, I'm just going in. He's on this like really low fat diet. He had like 0% body fat. The guy was ripped. Well, on Monday he comes in. He had not warmed up. He literally ripped his pec right off of his right pec, and he came in, and his right pec was up here in his armpit. I'm telling you this story because it's an illustration of like how we lose elasticity. and it was the man, this man was in tears. What am I going to do? I was like, well, I guess your bodybuilding days are over. Well, can't you reattach it? And it was like, well, first off, that needs to be done within 8 hours because that muscle contracts. And then you're going to have a big zipper here, and they're going to look like you've had open heart surgery. So who's going to look at you? So I'm sorry, you blew it. And that happens a lot, especially as we get older. So stretching, warming up, warming down. That's all important. So we lose that elasticity, and we have increased fragility. We can see, that when we touch ourselves, we can bruise more easily. There's less fat underneath the tissue. There's less of that subcutaneous fat. We have less of it, so that's why we get age lines. And we have a loss of body water. And interestingly, so we lose, up until about the age of 70, we lose about 300 milliliters of total body water. And then with that, there's an equal reduction in lean body mass as we get older. And then that gets much accelerated after the age of 70. So we lose even more body water and more lean muscle mass. So what can we do to prevent it? And I think, all this stuff. Try to get some regular physical activity. Try to, if given an opportunity, like if you can, walk far. At least walk. Park your cars further out in the parking lot and force yourselves to walk. It doesn't mean you have to get an expensive gym memberships, put on the spandex and go work out. It means just movement. Walk. If you can't walk, move your arms. It all counts. Eat healthy. We should eat more like cows and not eat cows. We should, plant-based diets are really kind of very important. Don't smoke. And if you do quit, it's never too late to quit smoking. Sometimes it's too late. Sometimes it's too late, like when you've already got the big whopping lung cancer, and it's like, you just go ahead and smoke away. It's not going to make a difference. But it's never too late to quit. This is the one I love. Manage your stress. Yeah, all right. And I used to give a talk because it was very interesting at NASA. They would all the these rocket scientists wanted me to give talks on stress, and how to help them manage the stress. And here I was like 32 years old at the time, and these were all, I'm trying to tell them how to manage stress. And I used, the idea is, I go back to that first line in M. Scott Peck's book, The Road Less Traveled. And his very first line is, life is difficult, in that book. And yeah, it's, life is difficult. Like that old 70s song or 60s song, I beg your pardon, but I never promised you a rose garden. So, that the life is tough. Life is tough, life is going to be hard. So we shouldn't have that expectation that it's not. So once we make that acceptance, and then the other thing that I will frequently quote was a book called Everything I Learned in Kindergarten, And it was, I should have written it out. I can't remember, it was, basically wash your hands, take a nap, be nice to other people, don't do anything that, it's the old rule, do unto others as you would like them to do unto you. And all these kinds of things, and interact, socialize, it's like when you share a problem, you're not giving someone else, it's like a problem shared, it's a problem had. That whole concept. So manage your stress. Get enough sleep. Avoid all substance abuse as much as possible. Ingest adequate amounts of calcium and vitamin D to maintain that bone health. And what's the calcium? What's the recommendation? In a postmenopausal woman, you should be getting about 1,500 milligrams of calcium a day. And you should be getting probably about 1,000 units of vitamin D a day. Some people require more, especially the vitamin D if their vitamin D is low. But to maintain that bone, that bone health, be social. Be social. Brush and floss your teeth. That a lot of heart disease is directly related to bacterial infections in the mouth. And love. Reach out. And as Lori said today, I even written this down. I was like, wow, that's pretty cool. Reach out, do something for someone besides yourself. Give the talents that we have been given, that we all have, to make someone else's life a little bit better. So, that's all I had prepared. Is there, open up for questions? Yes?
There's good evidence now over the past several years that there is neurogenesis in the brain, particularly with exercise and hippocampus.
Yes, that's exactly right. Yes, you're exactly right. We used to, and kind of similar thoughts about atherosclerosis, that once it's there, it's there. Or once you've had nerve damage, it's gone.
Right.
That's not necessarily true. You're exactly right.
And there's other evidence. Franklin, I think, is one of the Rush School in Chicago about their DASH diet and Mediterranean diets, how healthy living and exercise reverse changes of the
Cognitive function. Yes, exactly. You're exactly right. And you know more about that.
on the neuroanatomy.
I know. It was like teacher of the year multiple times there at UM at medical school. So yes, I appreciate that.
Does statins reduce your muscle mass?
Say that again?
Statins reduce your muscle mass?
And everything, I haven't seen information that says that. You're going to hear a lot of stuff about risk benefit. And anything you put into your mouth has the potential for a side effect. And so what we are trying to do is we're trying to look at the risks versus the benefits. And if the risks outweigh the benefits, don't do it. But if the benefits way outweigh the risk, then that's something that's what we try to recommend. There's with statins, it's not so much muscle mass that gets delayed, but there is a very small percentage of people that can actually get what they call rhabdomyolysis, which is where inflammation of the muscle, severe inflammation of the muscle. And that really is very, very rare. It's about 1 in 1,000 people. More commonly, about 1 in 100 when they take a statin, they may get muscle aches. which is very, very different than this inflammation of the muscle. So it's exceedingly rare, and yeah, about another 2 or 3% can bump their liver enzymes, but there's a certain level of liver enzyme that we tolerate because of the benefits of statins in the right person. You know?
Just a question, you mentioned that we lose fluid as we get older.
Mm-hmm.
How come my weight's not going down?
That's a good question. Maybe ask Virgin, what do you call Yes?
So with all this aging, and that will be a higher percentage of the population, gerontology, that specific field of medicine, are they accepting more people? Are they trying to increase that program? I'm thinking of my mother and her need for more of that.
Oh, yeah, I mean, well, gerontology is the study of the aging.
Right.
They're usually non-medical scientists, and then Lori's sister-in-law is a premier gerontologist in the country. Over in Stillwater, she's in Stillwater,
St. Cloud.
St. Cloud, Minnesota. And we were blessed up in Cleveland that the son of one of our family, his family, he was probably the fourth, and then we also had a member who passed away at Cleveland who had been a premier gerontologist. Geriatrics is the study, is the medical profession. You know, a geriatrician are people who are specifically trained to treat elderly folks.
Do you think there's an increase in people trying to get degrees in that? I mean, it seems like I haven't heard much about that field and how it should be growing. They should be.
Yeah, I think that there are some people that are any adult physician should have some knowledge, some expertise in the treatment of geriatrics, because just like children pediatrics are not just little adults, geriatric patients are not just older adults. I mean, they're because again, a lot of the stuff with geriatrics is because of these changes in our body part. You know, as medicines get metabolized, they get absorbed, they get distributed differently because of this change in body water. So that usually is you have to be much more careful in titrating doses, that you don't start a person, an older adult, on high dose medicine right at the beginning. You know, you kind of titrate it up, and little changes can make big differences. Yeah.
So this loss of body water, it's totally different from dehydration, which is something.
Yes, it's completely different from dehydration.
So you can't drink a lot of water for a week.
No, it reminds us that we should make sure we're drinking a lot of water. But you know, it would happen to everybody as we get older. Yes.
I've often wondered how much DNA plays into the aging process for each of us.
Say that again.
How DNA
Oh,
how our cells are, what's already in us, you know, from our parents and so forth. Is it possible to override your own DNA to change it? Or are you who you are from lack of birth?
Well, you know, that's an interesting question, and I think that's kind of the forefront. You know, the whole DNA testing and all these kind of looking for it's as much of an ethical question as it is a medical question. You know, there are research. I mean, there's a lot of research going into seeing if they can repair, you know, identifying genes that might be mutated and trying to repair those genes. And there's a lot of research that is going into that right now. And that's basically what Alzheimer's, you know, all the Alzheimer's research is looking at in terms of reparative DNA. A lot of stuff, I mean, even in something that I know a little bit about is with HIV care. You know, that the problem with the HIV DNA actually was RNA and HIV, and it gets turned into DNA, and then the DNA that replicated is the whole code for making the HIV virus is then inserted into that infected person's genetics and their CD4 lymphocytes. And so, like, to cure it, you'd have to be able to cleave out that gene. you know, and we're not there yet. So, you know, but it's a compelling thing. Is there things that we can do to overturn our DNA or to not speed up the problem? You know, the one that I think of a lot is Huntington's chorea. It's a horrible neurologic condition that almost is there's no cure for it, and an early death. In Huntington's chorea, it's like where they have this hemiballism, but you know, where the person suddenly flails their arms, you know, and it leads to dementia and to death, usually in your 30s and 40s. It is. I have one patient with that right now.
Woody Guthrie.
Pardon?
Say Woody Guthrie was
Did he have that?
the, yeah,
I didn't
but
know.
Harlow didn't, he didn't get it. His son-
Yes, and it is a genetic condition that is inherited. But I still maintain that all of this stuff, you know, this little laundry list, you know, get your sleep, manage your stress, eat well, don't smoke, don't do drugs, you know. As I like to say, you know what the definition of an alcoholic is? My definition is anyone who drinks more than the doctor.
You drink more than me, you've got a problem.
But, you know, all that kind of stuff is, yeah, so that's a forefront of research right now into multiple different conditions.
Do we often predict our future by our parents or grandparents?
Depends. You know, certain, let's say cancer, for instance. You know, that we do know that there is a genetic, colon cancer and breast cancer and prostate cancer, that there is a genetic inherited tendency for. But lung cancer, no. Leukemia, no. Pancreatic cancer, which you hear a lot about now, no. It's not genetic. Or at least not that we know of. And the thing that's growing is the whole concept of infectious disease. You know, with like infectious diseases as the cause of cancer. And so the one that I would use is the human papillomavirus with cervical cancer. And not just cervical cancer. You know, as I like to say, human papillomavirus is a large family of viruses. There's probably about 80 different viruses in that family. If you've ever had a wart, you've had human papillomavirus. It's human papillomavirus type 1 causes warts. There are 14 of those viruses that are the oncogenic viruses, and they're numbered. And it's, the ones I can remember are 16, 18, 31, and 33. Those are the ones that cause about 95% of all cancer-related problems from human papillomavirus. So I like to say it's like if you have a huge family, and you have 80 first cousins, and you go to a family reunion, most of those cousins are pretty cool people. You know, you want to hang out with them, your kids play with each other, you know. But then if you had 80 first cousins, you know that one is like, oh, stay away from that one. You know, he beats his wife. Or that one, oh, we just got out of prison. Or, you know, that one really drinks too much. Or, you know, and that's true in the human papillomavirus family. So human papillomavirus is it's attributed to causing cervical cancer, but it's not only. I mean, like Michael Douglas has throat cancer from human papillomavirus. Farrah Fawcett Majors died the same day that Michael Jackson died. They said it was colon cancer, but it wasn't. It was anal cancer from human papillomavirus. So it's the direct relationship, as I like to say, the human papillomavirus story. There's only 3 kinds of women. You know, we look at 3 kinds of women who do not have to worry about human papillomavirus. And that would be, because this is a sexually transmitted disease. If you look at all sexually active women, 80% of them have been infected with one of the oncogenic human papillomaviruses sometimes during their life. But your body fights it off. It's the 20% that don't fight it off that get into the problem. So if 80% of women have this, somewhere, depending on the study, looking between 50 to 80% of women have this virus, probably 100% of the guys, we got it. You know, because we're the root of all evil. But there's three kinds of women that don't have to worry about human papillomavirus. Mother Teresa, God rest her soul, I would like to think never had to worry about human papillomavirus. My mother. I know for a fact that she only had sex with my father. And I know that he only ever had sex with them for the 84 years of her life. And I think they only had sex 3 times. Once you conceived my brother, must have conceived me one time. That's fine. And Lori was there, Ron was there at my mother's funeral. It was very sad. And it was, you know, open casket. And we're standing there, and the grandkids are there, and everyone's crying, and my dad's crying, and I'm crying, and my brother's standing next to me as we're looking. He says, "Do you remember when you were 5?" And I say, "We caught mom and dad doing it." Yes. He said, "Are you thinking about that right now?" He said, "Would you shut up? What is wrong with you? You are a sick man." I was like, so my mother. And then the third are lesbians, women who have only ever had sex with other women. So they're kind of immune to human papillomavirus. So that's an infectious disease. And out of that research, we're looking at a lot. We now believe that maybe type 1 diabetes is an infectious disease process. There are a lot of things. There is even the talk about the development of atherosclerosis in the heart being related to bacteria, coming from your teeth. The other one that's really compelling is the H. pylori, Helicobacter pylori story. So Helicobacter pylori, everyone's familiar with that bacteria? Helicobacter pylori is a bacteria that grows in dirt. It grows in the soil. And it is the cause of ulcers. 85% of all ulcers, stomach ulcers, are caused by infections with Helicobacter pylori, and also stomach cancer. So I think way back when, 35 years ago, almost 40, when I was in medical school, we were taught, and I remember as a third-year medical student in my surgery rotation, we were doing these horrible surgeries for these people that had, recurrent stomach ulcers, and we thought it was all stress. It was really just stress, stress, and it was like the type A personality. And so we were going in and we were doing vagotomies, which would be cutting the vagal nerve to the stomach so that it wouldn't cause a secretion of acid. And it wasn't until about 2003, 2004, that these two researchers, they both have, one was a PhD, one was an MD, they actually, here in the United States, they were US doctors, they isolated the Helicobacter pylori bacteria. And then how they proved that it causes stomach cancer is then the gastroenterologist, the MD that did this research, he infected himself deliberately with Helicobacter pylori. They did an endoscopy a few months later. He had an ulcer, and they were able to grow that bacteria out of his stomach ulcer. And because of that, those two got the Nobel Prize in medicine in 2006. And it revolutionized because, so this is another infectious disease. So how do you get it? We believe that half of the world's population have Helicobacter, have been infected with this bacteria. And we think that you get infected when you're under the age of 5. Because you ever seen a 2-year-old playing? They're playing outside and everything goes right in their mouth. But it's also from not eating, not eating poorly washed root vegetables, potatoes, onions, carrots, turnips, radishes, and ingesting those. But it takes about 20 to 30 years after infection before it causes problems. So, and I was thinking back to, I remember one of my early patients was a Japanese lady, a lady of Japanese descent, who was dying of stomach cancer. And she died while I was taking care of her as a 4th-year medical student. And back then was, Japanese people are pretty, that's a genetic problem among Japanese people. wrong, it's an infectious disease problem. You know, it had nothing to do with genetics. Stomach cancer is not a genetic problem, it's an infectious disease problem. So that's another big area of research, is to look at infectious disease causes for disease. Yes.
Why is that 5-year-old who's eating dirt developing antibodies for that?
Well, you do, but and we think they're younger because under the age of 2, the immune system isn't developed enough, and you don't get, like a 2-year-old, kids under the age of 2, they don't get strep throat. Now, they can get the strep infection, but the strep throat doesn't cause the problems, the post-streptococcal glomerulonephritis, the kidney failure that can happen, because their immune systems are not developed enough. So we believe that, so under the age of 2, I haven't treated pediatrics in many years, but I've kids in a lot of years, but we never test a 2-year-old or younger for strep throat. First of all, try to swab a 2-year-old.
So I guess the question is a 5-year-old dirt eater less likely to have a problem than somebody who doesn't eat dirt, eats the dirt?
Not necessarily, no. No, this is a bacteria that does not get into your system. It stays in the stomach and it buries itself into the lining of the stomach, and it causes local problem. It's a local infection. It's not a systemic infection. So did that answer your question? Yeah. Yeah. Okay.
So the grandma's old saying that, oh, kids gotta eat a peck of dirt before they die. And the 5-second rule, you know, falls in through 5 seconds to get.
Yeah, well, man, this is a bacteria that lives
Right.
in soil. No, it is more related to actually sanitation. It's transmitted fecal-oral. So if a person has it, and then the bacteria is in their fecal material. And so, like, especially in poorly developed countries, you know, that material gets into the soil, and that's how they're getting infected. But it's found everywhere in the world. I mean, we have it here in the United States, even though we have some better hygiene habits than other people, other places. Yes.
So there's a book by John Robbins called Healthier 100, and he was studying civilizations have the most number of centenarians to see what they had in common. You know, for instance, Okinawan was one, the Romans in Ecuador, and he found something very similar to what you were saying, which is that all the examples of those societies, they very low in the food chain. They get a normal, but I mean for us it would be a lot. They get a lot of exercise and everything in their life, and they eliminate loneliness because they're very close societies. And one of the things he was looking at is that loneliness has as much of a factor in your life expectancy as smoking. So when you put all the factors together, smoking is considered very hazardous to your health, but loneliness was just as much of a factor
Right.
as
Right, that's exactly right. And like married men
that's
who are in a happy, or in a good, a healthy relationship, you know, have half the rate of heart disease as unmarried men. I'm not sure about the research on women, but it's the same lines. Yes.
Yes, I always take moxicillin before I go to a dentist's office. Would you recommend that?
Only certain people should take that medication is if you have a heart valve problem.
Well, I had so many people die when they did go to the dentist that that's the reason I take
Doing prophylactic antibiotics before a dental procedure is recommended in people that have heart valve problems, you know, particularly mitral valve prolapse with a murmur, with a significant prolapse. They should probably be, and anyone with an artificial heart valve, anyone with an artificial joint. should take that before, and not just dental procedures, but if there's, colonoscopies, if there's a cystoscopy, but as a general rule, in an otherwise healthy person with no artificial joints, no artificial valves, no valvular problems, I wouldn't recommend taking amoxicillin before you go to the dentist. I just wouldn't do it.
Okay.
Yes?
We go to an exercise program for people over 65, and it's weights and different, exercises. And when I got there, I know people who in their 80s and 90s who do that program. I made the sad observation that they're alert, they're oriented, they can lift more than I can, but the skeletal deterioration still progresses.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, so if you're looking at osteoporosis particularly, so everybody, let's look at osteoporosis. So every woman over the age of 65 should be screened for osteoporosis at least once. And then Medicare will pay for repeat screening every 2 years. And then if they're on treatment for osteoporosis, then they will even pay for it every year. But depending on what that initial screening shows, that if a person has, healthy bones, and how they compare that is they look at the density of the bone and they compare it to a healthy 35-year-old woman. And they do this thing called a T-score. How do you compare to the density of a healthy 35-year-old woman? And then if you're below a certain number, it's called osteopenia. It's like -1 to -2.5. In other words, if you have, and that's a standard deviation. So if you have 2 standard deviations below an average for bone density, then you're considered osteopenic. And if it's -2.5 or greater, it's osteoporotic. So every woman should be screened for osteoporosis at the age of 65. Every man should be screened starting at age 70. Now, people would get, that's the current guidelines for osteoporosis screening. People should be screened earlier if they are on chronic steroids. People that might have bad asthma, rheumatoid arthritis, they should do it. There's some argument about diabetics. People with diabetes should be screened earlier. Asthmatics, especially if they get recurrent blasts of steroids, when they have a bad asthma attack, should probably be screened earlier. Or if there's a significant family history of premature osteoporosis, and the operative word there is premature. Like once you hit 65, ain't premature anymore. And the risks for osteoporosis would be postmenopausal, white, thin, smoking women with a family history. So those are your 5 risks for osteoporosis. Thin, white, Caucasian, or European descent, smokers, family history. There's one more, what did I say? Over the postmenopausal.
And dairy products,
Yeah. And the whole business about vitamin D. Do you know why vitamin D is so important with bone health? And that's kind of an interesting thing. Vitamin D, we make vitamin D in our skin from exposure to sun. If you take a black person and a white person and expose them to the same amount of sun, the white person will make more vitamin D than a black person will because of the pigmentation in the skin. Kind of delays development of the production of vitamin D. So at that point, it's called monohydroxy vitamin D. It goes to the kidney and it gets metabolized into the active form of vitamin D, which is 125 dihydroxy vitamin D. And then that active form of vitamin D goes to the lining of our intestine. And what it does is it grabs calcium that we have in our diet to get it absorbed. If you're looking at a chemistry panel and you look at the normal ranges for the 5 essential electrolytes, sodium, potassium, chloride, carbon dioxide, and calcium, there are very specific normal ranges for those 5 electrolytes. And those are empirically based normal ranges. And if you go from any lab around the country, from any hospital lab, LabCorp, Quest, they will all have the exact same normal ranges because we know human cells do not work well outside of that normal range. Other lab values are statistically determined. So what's a normal, some of them are evidence-based, like the definitions of diabetes are determined by research, but the other lab values that are determined, like a perfect example would be liver enzymes and renal function tests. Those are statistically determined, so that you can go, and even white blood cell count numbers are actually statistically determined. What I mean by that is the lab looks at their entire population of people, both healthy and unhealthy, and they take the average value of whatever they're looking at, let's look at white blood cell count, and then they take 2 standard deviations above and below that, and that gives you the normal range. So what that means is 95% of the people who are normal will fall within that normal range. 5% of the people who are in the perfect bell curve, so it would be 95% are falling in between the normal range, but then 2.5% would fall above it, and 2.5% would fall below it, and they're still healthy. All right, they're still considered healthy. So those normal values are very, the range is, the better thing is to look at the trend. If you have multiple data points, to look at a trend. But with calcium, it's a very narrow range. It has to be, it's like 8.6 to 10.2, or depending, so that's the normal range. And we know that human cells do not function well when that gets outside of that normal range. So if we don't have the vitamin D to grab the calcium to keep our serum levels of calcium within that very narrow range, and our body goes through great pains to keep that normal range there. If you're outside, as I like to say when I'm going over lab results with patients, these 5 numbers, I want them to be normal unless you're dead or dying. And so I say, all the time, if you're not dead or dying, because these are normal. These look good. So that's a good thing. Then your body starts to steal calcium where it can, and over time, where we keep our calcium in our bones. And so over years, if you don't have enough vitamin D, it'll leach calcium, it'll take it, it'll steal it from your bones over time. And that's going to then lead on to osteopenia and osteoporosis. So that's the vitamin D story.
Steve, we are kind of at the end of our time, and we really appreciate it. Could you just finish up a little bit about coronavirus, anything you want us to know or that would be helpful?
Yeah, it's here. It's not a hoax. It is, and it is something for us to all be very aware of, and to be very aware of it. And it was interesting. I was talking with Lois Legge right before when I was ushered out, because she's like freaking out because she's over the age of 70. And they're like saying, people over the age of 70 are at increased risk of dying. True, from the coronavirus, but it's underlying disease. It's like people who die that get sick and die from this have underlying disease. They're immunocompromised. They have liver disease. They have kidney disease. They have lung disease. They have cardiovascular disease. They're diabetics. It's very unusual for an otherwise healthy person to get sick and die from this. It is looking to be fairly, it's probably not as contagious as the flu, but it's about 10 times more lethal. And some studies are saying maybe 30 to 40 times more lethal than the flu. We don't have the data right now, because we have a policy in this country of don't test, don't tell. So we really don't know how many people have this, that's about. But everything that we're doing here at church, I think is really, really good. I mean, social distancing, wash your hands frequently, cough into your elbow, which I try to do regularly, I'm yelled at. Try and keep your hands away from your face. I love it that Cindy,
You're good.
what?
You're good.
I know.
Sorry, I'm very
Yeah,
Camus.
in Camus. Yeah, so last Sunday, I don't know if you saw her, she had her little band-aids on her, she had these little pieces of tape on both of her fingers. And I said, Cindy, what are you doing? I said, it's to remind me to keep my hands away from my face. I thought, well, that is really smart. That is really smart. You know, she tries to scratch her nose, she'll poke her eye out. So, because actually, it's a really good thing. So keep your hands away from your face as much as possible. Wash your hands. You know, but the challenge is to stay connected, the social. You know, reach out, Facebook, call people. You know, you may not be able to see them, but you can call them and talk to them. And I think, and just to clarify, when you said like Wednesday night, there will be Vespers, but it will be online. Yeah, okay, so you know, we'll have these opportunities throughout the week to stay connected to your church family. Yeah, I mean, it's real. I mean, Ron and I were over in Naples yesterday visiting Shyman Curtin, who you might know, moved over there. And we went out on Friday night when we got there. You wouldn't have known there was anything on Keeler. It was packed. The place was packed. And it was very, very interesting. It was the New York Times that did a study that looked at the response to coronavirus, Democrats versus Republicans. Truly. And we all know that there's kind of a Republican hotbed, so they're all like high-fiving each other and shaking hands and kissing, and it's like, oh! And we're all looking at it like, oh! What are you doing? It is here. It is a real thing. It was interesting. I was talking with Michelle Carabia, and I think besides having a beautiful singing voice, she's a server at a restaurant at a hotel in South Beach. She's really angry with her hotel. They're not doing anything to address coronavirus. They're not doing anything. They're not changing any of their habits. They're not talking to any of their staff about how to minimize that. And she's like saying, I'm going to say something. You know, so she listened to your sermon today too. You know, I mean, that's what she's there for. You know, so like speak up, because this is something that we need to. You know, by ignoring it, it's not going to be helpful. But we can still be respectful of each other.
Do you think these places that have like outdoor seating, there's any relative safety to
Probably.
still go out a little bit, or?
Probably. You know, and it was interesting, like if you look at the flu research, there's a reason why flu is around all year round. The reason why we see it in the winter months is because in most places, except for Florida, you know, it's colder, and so people are indoors more, and there's more contact that way. But the flu virus doesn't just come in September and go away in March. You know, it's around year round. But the chances of it catching it are with like kind of that intimate, close contact. So all the things that we're learning to do now and that we're trying to do, you know, are good, healthy habits that we should probably incorporate ongoing. You know, and we need to kind of paradigm shift in terms of how we interact.
Is the self-quarantine going to just decrease the peak and flatten it out so the same number of people are going to get it at the end?
Yeah, probably. And you know, part of that is, and I think that's probably true. That is probably true. They're talking about flattening out the curve. And why that's important is as many people, you know, with a virus that's 10 to 40 times more lethal than flu, you're going to have a lot of the people, how they die is respiratory problems. It's the pneumonia, the respiratory failure. You know, a sobering fact is we only have about a little less than 1 million hospital beds in this country. You know, we have 1 million hospital beds. We have about 65,000 ventilators in the entire country. So if we get slammed with anywhere, you know, 1.7 million people infected with this virus, you know, take, you know, 1% of 1.7 million is 170,000. You know, 170,000 people that can be expected to die, and we only have 65,000 ventilators. There's going to be people that are going to get sick and die because we don't have the equipment to take care of them.
And they tried antiviral things like acyclovir.
Acyclovir won't work for this virus. And there's, basically the only virus we have a cure for, the only virus we have a cure for is hepatitis C. That's the only antiviral drug that eradicates hepatitis, is that particular virus. There is no cure for any other virus. Tamiflu decreased the length of time for influenza A or B in terms of how they're sick, but it does not kill the virus. So we don't have, acyclovir does not kill herpes. The old joke, love can come and go, but herpes is forever. Once you have it, you're infected with that. And again, that's because the herpes genetic material gets incorporated into, and actually it hangs out in your nerve cells to a certain specific area. It does not get into your blood. It's not. And this coronavirus, it's a respiratory virus. So you have to be exposed to respiratory droplets. It's a respiratory virus. It reproduces in the mucous membranes of our nose, mouth, throat, down into our bronchi. It's not blood. It's not a blood virus. So be careful. Yeah.
Thank you so much.
You're more than welcome.